Hello, babes. Welcome to Coffee and Tequila, the show for people who love stories and love storytelling, where you get a morning show on Mondays and a late show on Fridays if I decide to stay on track. My name is Zach, and as always, this episode is currently being sponsored by Helix Sleep, and I'll let you know a little bit more about them a little bit later. First, as the title suggests, you clicked on the video or the podcast episode. We're going to be talking about Marilyn Monroe's most famous dress in American history, or the world, I don't know, let me know. The famous JFK dress she sang Happy Birthday to the President in. It's the dress that's actually been in conversation a lot recently because Kim Kardashian wore it to the Met Gala. I will say, I already had this episode planned before she wore that dress to the Met Gala, so when she did, I was like, shit. Now it just looks like I'm bandwagon hopping because everybody's talking about it now. But really, the truth was, my inspiration for this was I just bought a catalog set from the 2016 Julian's auctions auction. Like, it was like a 3-day auction that they sold off a bunch of Marilyn Monroe stuff. And in the auction, on one of the days, they sold her a JFK dress for about almost $5 million to Ripley's, believe it or not. And so one of these catalogs pretty much covers that whole thing. It covers the dress, the receipts from that weekend, sketches from Bob Mackie, and this catalog, this neat little catalog, actually has a little gimmick I want to show y'all. So I didn't know it did this, but when you open it up,
Mr. President, Marilyn Monroe.
it's got like a little song in it. Opens up and you can hear the audio from it. For this episode, because Alistair still ain't here, I'm going to have Paul Walsh from the Valley of the Dolls podcast come on and talk about this iconic event with me. Paul is amazing. The Valley of the Dolls podcast is one of my favorite podcasts, and I'm really happy that he agreed to come on this with me. I've been listening to it for about a year, and it covers everything old Hollywood. Like, it's old Hollywood galore, you know. This is right up his alley. I know he's going to come in with all of the facts, which makes me a little bit nervous because I'm fairly confident with my knowledge about Marilyn Monroe and her life and career, but this is a podcast he does. This is the niche, you know. This is he focuses on these things specifically. So I'm nervous that I'm not going to have all of my information right. I've made all of my notes. I've read a couple books. I did the research. And I'm like, oh my shit. Well, what if I say this is like 1962 and it's like 1961? Or I say, oh, it's May whatever. And he's like, nope, actually, it's May 2nd. I don't know. I guess we'll just be comparing notes. We'll be comparing information and details. Neither of us were alive then. So if he schools me, then I guess I can just say, sir, you were not even alive. So, but I'm actually really excited to have him on. I adore his podcast. So yeah, without any further ado, let's go into the ad real quick. Let's hear a little word from our sponsor, and then we'll get into the episode, and I'll bring him home. Now it's time to tell you all a little bit about our sponsor for today's episode, Helix Sleep. Helix is a premium mattress and a box company that makes beds to fit your unique sleep style. Feels like it's day 97 sleeping by myself with that Alistair in the bed next to me. It's a king-size bed, so it's a pretty big bed to sleep in by myself with just Brando. So our Helix mattress, I'll be really excited when he comes back and falls into it with me and takes a big old nap with me. We love our Helix mattress. It's the most comfortable mattress we've ever had. We had one mattress that we got from like Amazon when we first got married, and it was terrible. And I think Helix mattress was the very next mattress that we got. We got the queen-size Midnight Lux mattress. Ended up upgrading to a king-size Midnight Lux mattress, and it's just perfect. Helix knows that everybody is different and everybody has their own unique needs, and so they've made a sleep quiz that'll match you with your perfect mattress based on your needs. I am an all-over sleeper. Alistair's more of a side sleeper. He likes a firm mattress. I like, more medium. We took the quiz together and we got the Midnight mattress. And one of the best parts about Helix is that they deliver the mattress right to your door for free. It comes rolled up in a box and is super easy to set up yourself. And if it makes you nervous to buy something online that you haven't tried, Helix has a 100-night sleep trial, so you get more than 3 months to make sure that you absolutely love it. And if you don't, they'll pick it up for you and you'll get a full refund. Now, if you or somebody you know is in the market for a new mattress and you think that Helix might be right for you, you can go to helixsleep.com/tequila and you can get up to $200 off of your mattress and 2 free pillows. We're back. I am back with Paul Walsh of the Valley of the Dolls podcast. Do you want to describe the podcast?
It was a lockdown project, right? So I just wanted to talk about the things that I liked to listen to, really. But it's basically talking about the careers of old Hollywood actresses, looking at specific areas of their work. So thinking about previous episodes, we've obviously got some Marilyn on there, Judy Garland, Joan Crawford, Betty Davis, all the usual suspects. And it really is a mix between sort of audio essays, which is usually me talking for a long period of time with some clips interjected. But then again, just conversations, really similar to this one with lots of different people.
Very cool, very cool. Who's your favorite that you've done so far, or that you who's your favorite of all time? That like you can watch every documentary about every book, you have to pick something.
I can't pick favorites. Do you know what? It was Judy Garland was the first one, but yeah, Marilyn's pretty much up there as well. As cliche as that sounds, right?
And it is cliche, but it's just so true, right? Like there's so much, especially when there's like a plethora of material out there to like consume. I have read. I mean, I don't even have as many books as you have right there, but I've read like 3 or 4 biographies on her, and details change from book to book, and I feel like every book I find new stuff. They're always changing dates, they're always changing details. We never really. So I'm hoping that the story we kind of put together today is accurate, but it's anybody's guess. What source did you sort of use to put your information together here?
Well, it's a bit of a mixture, really. So there's a couple of sources that I would always go to. So Michelle Morgan, she's a British author. She's wrote a couple of books on Marilyn. She's actually just wrote one quite recently called Marilyn the Queen, which is about her time in London. But her approach is really as a historian. So she's not necessarily about the rumors and the controversies as such. So it's pretty much based in fact. I've got a couple of connections that I've kind of spoken to online who I value their opinion probably a lot more than I would value my own. So it's just a mixture of that, really. I don't tend to trust what Google or Wikipedia tells me, to be honest. So yeah, they're the main ones.
Yeah. Okay. So I did 2, and then I went off of the. Have you ever seen the documentary about her called Marilyn: The Final Days? And it's all about like the making of. That's one of my favorite documentaries of all time. Like I think it's so good. And we won't really cover the making of like Something's Got to Give as much. We'll touch on it and we'll talk about it a little bit. But for anybody out there who like really wants something good. So
it's worth seeing it for the footage, isn't it? It's worth the actual footage of the film because no one saw it.
Was that the first documentary that used that footage too? I think they found it, right? Or
I think it had been used in like the early 90s. But it was really, really bad quality. And I think that was the first documentary that kind of put it together in a decent format and actually pieced together what the film could have potentially looked like. But like the raw footage of that is really interesting to watch. There's loads of it on YouTube as well.
As I was reading through some of these documentaries, they were bringing up certain scenes that I'd forgotten about that they'd filmed because they had her filming with like a dog. Anytime they would get her to set, they would have her filming something weird like with the kids or the dog. And so I just sat there and watched like 9 minutes of her just with the dog, and I was like, this is wonderful. I love this.
Yeah, they couldn't get her on the set and then the dog wouldn't cooperate. So it wasn't exactly the best use of time.
She was freaking happy about it too, though, because she didn't have to do whole much. So I used primarily Marilyn Monroe, the biography by Donald Spoto, and then what is it called? The Secret Life of Marilyn Monroe, which is very, very gossipy. This is one that's kind of been written off a little bit just because of how gossipy it is, but I'm going to go with it anyway because I liked some of the facts in it. And I balance between wanting just hardcore facts all the time, and then like a narrative, right? And like some storytelling and like Joyce Carol Oates has a book called Blonde that's all about her, but like she did her research, but it is a novel, it's like imagining what happened and what she was thinking and all of that.
Yeah, well, a novel as well, because then you can say that it's a work of fiction. So then you're not going to get the pressure of actually if you get something wrong. And to be honest, it's interesting that you mentioned that because obviously that's coming to Netflix, isn't it? Towards the back end of the year. Yeah. And a lot of interesting press at the minute. It was delayed for ages. I mean, they filmed it, I think, before the pandemic, actually. There's been a lot of issues that have pushed it back, but that'll be interesting.
I feel like that one's been in production forever too. Like they had so many different actresses attached to it at one point or another. What do you think? What do you think about the casting they went with?
Do you know what? I haven't seen the only is it Anna Diamas? Is that how you pronounce her name? Yeah, so I've seen it. I've seen her in James Bond, and she's in it for like 10 minutes, and she's just fighting people with a machine gun. So I don't really know much about her range, but it's quite an interesting choice to think about how she would pull this off.
We're going to be talking primarily about the Marilyn Monroe JFK dress, the dress she wore to sing "Happy Birthday" to John F. Kennedy. This is like the most famous dress in America, right? This is the dress that sold for the most money, like ever, even today. What was it? It was like $4.8 million. It was almost $5 million this damn dress sold for. And then it's been in the news a lot lately because Miss Kim Kardashian took it off the rack and wore it down the red carpet of the gala. What do you think about that? We're going to just go ahead and start there.
You know what? Actually, I heard a rumor that it was. I think I read something on like Twitter or something like that it was going to happen. I thought, no, like it's not. Yeah. Next day, I woke up and I just saw it, and I thought, oh my God, do you know what?
Yeah,
I'm not going to sit here and badmouth the Kardashians. Like they are what they are, and they've got money, and Ripley's, believe it or not, own it. So I don't really have a huge amount of faith that they're going to approach it from a historical artifact. It's a money making machine, right? And anything attached to Monroe is all about publicity and money. I don't think it was great. Did you see her getting into it? Did you see the video of her like squeezing into it?
So I saw them. They're like pulling it up. They're like fully with their hands, just like fully pulling it up. And then by the time she wore it down, because that was the first fitting, right? And it was like it didn't fit, so she had to lose like 16 pounds. And then she came back, and it fit. But it didn't fit because in the back she had to wear that stole because it wasn't fitting around her ass.
It reminded me of like White Chicks, when you go into the like dressing room and comes out in that outfit. It's like she wanted to wear it so bad she would have starved herself. But the thing is, and obviously I'm sure we'll get to it, but that dress was like made bespoke to fit Marilyn Monroe. Now you can diet all you want, but you are not going to have the same proportions. I mean, I think Kim Kardashian's like 5'2", and Marilyn Monroe was, correct me if I'm wrong, 5'4.5" or something. So that's why she was wearing those like stripper heels, like to literally get some like height. So the whole thing was just, I mean, she obviously wanted to do it, but I just think it probably wasn't the wisest thing to do from a preservation perspective.
So there's a theory that she didn't actually wear it, and that was a replica, and that was done to incite some controversy and get a little bit of press for her and for Ripley's, believe it or not, because I'm sure that Ripley's, attendance records went up after that. I have a buddy who has a podcast called Beyond the Blinds, and they asked somebody who does like fashion for a living if that was the real dress, and I did a lot of comparing because I got a little bit more heated than I should have, right? It's something that like literally doesn't affect my life at all. And there's bigger problems in the world, but I got a little heated about it. And so I was like comparing pictures. I'm like, okay, that bead is there. That one's there. I was like very much lining all the beads up, and they line up. So if it's a replica, it's really good. But this woman who gave a quote to their podcast basically said that, it just doesn't make sense for that to happen. One, because they would have to like literally pull it up and stuff like that. That the dress is so old that the fabric would be falling apart if they're pulling on it, stretching on it. That the beads would be everywhere, and it just didn't make sense that would be really happening. So I don't know how I feel about it. I'm like on the fence whether it really happened or not.
Yeah, I mean, she pissed a lot of people off with it, definitely. And I think, I mean, who knows? But I think, I mean, she obviously had that mink, the stole around her backside, so you couldn't see her. But she couldn't move in it. So even if it was a replica, it was a really ill-fitting replica because she could barely get up the stairs. But then actually, the pictures that I saw afterwards when she was at the event, she looks much more comfortable. So I think the theory is she walked into the red carpet with the dress on, barely fitting her, got to the top of the stairs and changed.
Yeah, as after the carpet she took it off and she went and put on a replica, because I know that Ripley's has like one or two replicas with them. So I wonder if she had one made. She should have just had one made for her own body, right? We would have understood it. We would have understood what she was doing, and it would have fit her exactly like it would have fit Marilyn,
Yeah.
And people still would have talked about it.
Yeah, but I think it's that whole thing, isn't it? Like nobody's worn it since Marilyn wore it, and clearly she's obviously a fan. I mean, I think she
Yeah.
has a couple of her other dresses or some other. She has Elizabeth Taylor's jewelry, so she's
Mhm.
obviously into that kind of thing, and she's got the money to do it. So
Yeah. She posted another picture wearing the green dress from the Golden Globes that Marilyn attended. And I know that
I
one
don't
is a
believe it's
replica.
her.
That wasn't real.
Yeah,
That was
that
not real. That was
no
a
way.
replica. Absolutely.
Yeah, because Marilyn, I mean, obviously we'll talk. I'm sure we'll get to it in a second. You know, Marilyn at this point she was really thin. Like she
Yeah.
has this perception of she was plus size, but she really wasn't. And
Yeah.
especially at this time, I think she was the thinnest she'd ever been. So you know, Kim Kardashian does not have the same shape as Marilyn Monroe. So
Yeah. This was the thinnest that she'd ever been. So Marilyn was basically coming back. She'd just come back from New York. She spent a little bit of time in New York and was like kind of challenging herself over there. You know, she was getting in theater. She was taking these theater classes and these acting classes. As somebody at her height who'd been in the business for 10 years already, listen, her films had grossed 200. I thought this was, I'd never read this fact before. Her films grossed $200 million at the time of her death. That's $2 billion in today's money. Like, that's insane.
no, and when you think about in you know in comparison how much she was actually paid for those films, I mean she was never a money motivated person, and actually she probably got the bad end of the stick. And what's ironic is that she continues to be monopolized financially for things like what we've just talked about there, and with Ripley. So yeah, she's always been someone who can make a lot of money, but unfortunately didn't make a huge amount for it herself.
She gets back to Hollywood. She's, you know, kind of getting her career back on track, and she'd been out for about a year, right? She
Yeah.
comes back in, and Fox immediately signs her. You know, they want her. They need money. Fox needs money because they have Miss Elizabeth Taylor running the circus over in, where were they by now? Either Rome or London.
Well, I
Is
think they
Rome?
started in London initially,
Yeah.
and then she had the life-threatening pneumonia, and then
Mhm.
they moved it to a warmer climate. But yeah, she
Yeah.
was getting paid $1 million for that
$1 million.
film. But
Yeah.
she actually came out with, I'm sure she came out with something way more, because she even had written into the contract that they used a certain type of camera that she now inherited through her, like one of her husbands who died, so that she was
Yes.
making a fortune.
She also had it written in that if they went over time, she gets paid extra. So and she went over time because of her own damn self, and she's still getting paid like so much more money.
How can you ask for overtime when you're getting paid $1 million? That's a bit cheeky, isn't it? Right?
It's insanity, but she could do it, you know. And then you have Marilyn Monroe, who's arguably like the same sort of caliber actress that Elizabeth Taylor would have been, right? Elizabeth Taylor maybe had some more serious roles under her belt, and Marilyn was still being looked at like, you know, this dumb blonde.
But I think the big difference is you know Marilyn was actually still part of the studio system, whereas Elizabeth
Yes.
Taylor had actually just broken free of that. So that was the huge thing at the time. You know, stars could literally command salaries like Elizabeth Taylor when they were working as an independent agent. So Marilyn had actually her contract had basically been renegotiated in 1955. So you know where she was in 1962, you know she was still owing Fox films on her old rate from say 7 years before. So she was actually delaying producing some of these
Yeah.
films because she didn't really want to. She didn't really like the material that they were making her do.
And I mean, she knew how to kind of get back at them. She would act up a little bit. She'd be a little bit late.
Yeah.
So like this movie, they get Something's Got to Give into production, and I was reading in one of these books that I was covering that's not even a movie that really would have made it past like an idea stage, just because the concept was just not even. You know, it wasn't going to make a huge boatload of money, but they needed just something. They needed money. They had Marilyn Monroe. They knew they could make $1 on it, and so they put this into production. They really rushed it. They never had a finished script. So Marilyn gets a lot of flack for being late, holding up production, and I agree. She did do all of that, right? She's a problem child.
Yeah.
But they didn't
Yeah.
have a finished script. They didn't even have all of the roles cast at this point, you know?
Yeah.
So I think all of the pieces were kind of shaky everywhere, but it like fell on her because she was the big name, right?
Yeah, and I think like what's interesting is actually one of her earlier films, Let's Make Love, which is quite similar to Somebody's Got to Give. It was directed by George Cukor. It was a Fox production. It was also being filmed without a finished script. And actually, when it got released, it was a huge loss for her. And actually, the critics were absolutely savage to her, you know, during that. So I can understand why she would have gone into this production thinking, okay, I've been here before, same studio, same director, same kind of script, same situation. So yeah, she probably was approaching with caution. And she was 36, so she turned 36 on that set, which again, I think an interesting point to note is, over 35 for a woman in Hollywood at that time was considered old, and over 40 was like your grandma.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
she was probably thinking there isn't too many chances that I've got left necessarily to get it wrong.
And she was incredibly self-conscious about everything at this point, right? The older she got, she was getting even more self-conscious, and she was hiring Paula Strasberg to be her on-set acting coach, and her guide, the buzzer in her ear. What did your book say about Paula Strasberg? Because I have one book that was like completely trashing her, and then one that was like she was a really good influence on Marilyn.
I think I think she was annoyance to anyone except Marilyn, but I think Marilyn leaned on her really heavily from a confidence perspective. I mean, prior to working with Paula Strasberg, she had an acting coach called Natasha Lites, who actually basically I believe that she worked with her from the late 40s all the way up until sort of the sort of mid 50s, really. So she'd always needed that extra security from a coach that was working solely for her. I think she probably trusted the acting coach more than the director, because she knew the acting coach was trying to get the best out of her performances, just getting the film done.
But she just really wanted to be good. I think that's just what she just, more than anything, she wanted somebody to say that she's really good, right? And not in a really good oh, your body is like snatched right now, you're wearing that outfit really good. She wanted somebody to say, look, you did this scene with the dog, fantastic. Oh, amazing scene. Amazing acting here. So she goes into this film, and immediately before she even begins filming, she has it. She lets everybody know, hey, I got to sing at the president's birthday gala on May 19th. I'm just letting everybody know. Write it out. Don't schedule me. Don't. And she also has. So I found this really interesting, that in all of her contracts she had a clause in there that she didn't have to work when she was on a menstrual cycle, and so that menstrual cycle already fell on May 19th anyway, so they wouldn't have been able to film anyway. So she goes into production on this movie, and everybody knows that she's going to be gone May 19th. Nobody expected all of the delays that were going to happen fairly,
but they probably should have, really. Let's be honest. I mean, she didn't have a great track record, and she's George Cukor had worked with her before, but I think the difference here was that actually there was so much financial pressure on the studio at that time, whether they expected it or whether they didn't. The money people wherever were saying this can't happen. I don't know if it was actually written into a contract or whether it was a verbal agreement, but like you said, she did have the agreement to go, but then she didn't show up for the first 3 weeks of shooting, and they filmed what they could around her.
They probably have to assume that she, in addition to being nervous about her performance and really wanting to do good, if she's slurring, she probably knows she was slurring, and she probably didn't want to go out there when she was slurring. So she hopped in a fucking car and took off back to her house in Brentwood and said that she was sick, right? And she just didn't show up. She worked it was one day that she worked up until.
Yeah, I mean, she didn't work. She didn't work a huge amount of days, and I think I believe that she had bad bronchitis, or she had a really bad sinus infection or something. And I think the problem with Marilyn is that she was so aware of actually a great deal of how she performed ultimately depended on how well she looked. So she's like, I can't go in there looking like crap, basically, because that's going to be reflected in on screen. And you know what? She was getting to a point where her last film, The Misfits, and then a previous film, Let's Make Love, and to an extent, Some Like It Hot, the media and the critics had actually been quite harsh on her physical appearance in those films. So you've got to think, is that something, again, that's playing on her mind when she's, she doesn't want to film when she's feeling ill, really?
Absolutely. She was losing sight of the fact that she was Marilyn Monroe, right? She didn't have people telling her that. She didn't have people reminding her hey, you're a baddie. You're that bitch. You are Marilyn Monroe. I guess we should back up a little bit. And she met JFK in March? Is when their sort of relationship started, their little fling that was always rumored. That was March, right?
Yeah, and I've seen there's so many conflicting rumors. This is an absolute rabbit hole in itself, isn't it? Because I was thinking about this earlier. Once you start peeling back the layers, it's what do you believe? What do you not believe? Personally, I think there's a lot of conspiracy. That's a load of crap, to be honest with you, because but equally, it's really, really hard to prove or equally disprove, right? You can't prove what's not there. But yeah, I think there was definitely meetings with JFK. There was definitely
Yeah.
meetings with the Kennedys, but I think that was probably more of an affiliation with Peter Lawford and kind of Frank Sinatra and that type of crowd. What do you
I
think?
think they probably had a couple flings. I think the story about them at Bing Crosby's house, the first time they would have hooked up, I think that's probably true. I
Yeah.
believe those witnesses. I don't believe. See, then it goes like you take one little morsel of something, right, and then everybody blows it up and like he's passing her off to his brother, right, and they're like she's going between
Yeah.
rooms, or there's all these different rumors. I think it was probably a sexual affair, and I think she probably fell for it a little bit more. If it did happen, I could see her falling for it a little bit more because between March and May, like it's only a couple months. That's not even like a whole 2 months, So you're at that point, if you are sort of infatuated with somebody, it's still burning bright. And so she's
Yeah.
going to make sure she's at this happy birthday event. She's going to make sure she's there for her man and wanting to like impress him and all of that. And so when May 19th rolls around, she tells everybody, hey, I think she went to work, up that week. She worked that
Yeah,
week.
she was, and that's why they didn't want it to get it to stop. I don't
Yes.
think
They were like,
They
she said,
right,
you know
we've
what?
got her on a roll.
I think I'm better. I can work for this week, but remember, I'm gone at the end of the week. So by the time this rolls around, they're like 4 days behind schedule. They've shot everything they can, just like you said. And she said, I am jetting off May 17th. May 17th comes, and she does leave, and immediately it's like an hour after she leaves because they were telling her, they were getting to her people, hey, tell her that if she goes, she's gonna be fired.
It didn't actually quite get her fired, but it definitely put I think it was the
Yes.
final straw that kind of brought the camel's back because she did return to the set after. She obviously filmed that nude scene afterwards, which I always think is quite interesting because, most of the footage that we actually see from that film was filmed after the Happy Birthday, but it was literally 2 weeks before obviously she was let go from the film.
But she gets to New York and they like serve her with that paperwork like really fast, and it is telling her, hey, there's going to be dire consequences if you do not if you get your ass back here. Like we need to film. You are such a nuisance on the set. We're not being we're losing all this money. Cleopatra is driving us crazy. They were putting the pressure on her, and she was pretty pissed too when she got that. I would have to imagine that she would not only be pissed that they would even send her that, knowing that they had this agreement already and that she expected them to honor it even if she hadn't showed up, but her people as well, right? Why weren't her people fielding this and like handling this for her? Because that's what they're hired for.
Exactly. And I think it goes back to what you just said, a while back around how much money she'd actually made that studio versus how they were treating her. So I think she was always on the back foot at this point with Fox because she instantly felt that she felt like they hadn't really respected her. So this was one thing that she'd agreed to. This is one thing that she was going to do. So I think she wasn't going to be bullied into going, and actually, getting her on a film set when she didn't want to be on a film set, let's be honest, you weren't going to get her there.
Oh, no, not at all.
So she wasn't about to head back.
Mm-mm. And understandably so. Like I get it. It's a pain in the ass. You're losing all this money. It's just going down the drain. Henry Weinstein was like probably pulling his hair out, getting all these calls from his financiers in New York. But imagine how shitty she'd been treated in Hollywood for about 10 years, right? Like, does that make somebody want to go on and sit on a set with everybody else? No. And then she knows this movie's going to come out and she's going to get all these reviews, especially after the last couple movies that came out.
I think she knew her own power to an extent, in a similar way to what Elizabeth Taylor knew her power, just to kind of compare them. At the end of the day, ultimately what happened was they did fire her, but I don't really think she thought that they would, because they needed her to make money.
She's really nervous about this performance as well, right? Again, like she doesn't really have anybody telling her like you're Marilyn Monroe, like boss up, bitch. So she's rehearsing the entire way there. She gets to New York. Richard Adler comes over, who's written like a little version of Happy Birthday and Thanks for the Memory. That's what it is. Yeah, so he writes like a little version of like Thanks for the Memory, and so they're rehearsing it at her white piano that Mariah Carey now owns. Just like the history there, right?
No.
I wish I was rich. I'd spend all my money on like celebrity memorabilia.
But that's what scares me. It's like you can just have money and you can just buy these things and you can just sit in like Marilyn's clothes if you want to in your own house. It's God, don't even get me started on that. I just think
I trust Mariah's with the piano though. She has it behind this like velvet rope that nobody's allowed to cross. So I trust her there. It's okay. It's okay. At least that's for one person. Fine. But so they're rehearsing for like 3 hours. He is kind of getting a little nervous because she's like really sexing this up, right? Her rehearsals are really sexy, and with each time she sings it, she's getting sexier and sexier, and her voice is coming lower, and she's like getting a lot more breathy. Even Paula Strasberg is telling her like, "This is becoming a parody. What are you doing here?" Everybody's telling her it's way too sexy. I think Adler even calls JFK himself and says, "Hey, she's gonna do this like really sexy," and I think JFK just says, "Sounds good to me."
And the thing is, like, you mentioned the rehearsal, like Marilyn, if you think about it, like she wasn't someone who went on TV. There's no, apart from she did a person-to-person interview in 1955, which wasn't that great, but she was somebody who didn't like, she was very nervous about making public appearances because the whole persona that was Marilyn Monroe was actually quite well crafted and put together. It wasn't necessarily what she was like all the time. So if you think about how many takes she required on a movie set, if you go out into Madison Square Garden, you've got one chance and you're on TV. So she's probably you can tell why she'd be nervous about that.
She was making sure that it was going to be. But you know what? It was also really interesting is that okay? So she was trying to divorce herself from this like dumb blonde role for the longest time. But this was her like fully pulling that back out of the box she'd put it in and put it under the bed, right? Like she was fully taking this role back out, and she was really really leaning into it. I think this was a time that I think it's so significant because she was wielding that dumb blonde role and really utilizing it to her advantage and really taking control of it and taking agency over it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think 1962 as an actual year really is really interesting in her. I guess her life and her career, because in the years prior to that, she'd really tried to move into another direction. And actually the 2 years before that, she'd been pretty much she made The Misfits and Let's Make Love and then didn't do anything at all. So this was kind of a year, like you said, where she was really trying to say, okay, so what does the next decade look like for me? She looks different. She'd lost weight. And like you said there, she was trying to kind of take ownership, I think, of what people expected her to be, really.
Yeah. And she was... If she was, like, I guess this goes back to JFK, if there was a relationship there, if there was an affair there, and the rumor was that he had tried to end it before this event, right? And he'd called her and told her this was over. And so if that was true, she's definitely leaning into it to try to get sort of advantage, right? Get him to look at her a little bit. And that's just, it's so relatable too, because when somebody really like remember a relationship that you really got your heart broken or something, or there's somebody you're really infatuated with and you want them to look twice at you. This is exactly what she's doing here. And like, I see it.
Yeah. And you know what? Let's just say for example, that is the truth. I mean, what a great kind of like, fuck you, basically, to sit there and like, and do that, because knowing that his wife Jackie wasn't actually at the event, but she was watching, the whole world was watching. So there's always going to be that kind of speculation, but whether that was actually the truth, who knows?
I don't know. I think that's pretty interesting that Jackie wasn't there. I think that spoke volumes. It wasn't unusual for her to like skip a little something. I think they said she had an equestrian event to go to, and so she was going for that. But this was a big event. This was a big something to skip.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting as well is actually, on the program, only Happy Birthday was included. So it didn't actually say Marilyn Monroe. So obviously it was all prearranged as a surprise, which she may or may not have been privy to. But yeah, it does seem odd that you wouldn't be at your husband's 45th birthday.
I would have to imagine that even if it wasn't advertised everywhere, Jackie knew about it. So Jackie knew all of his like little whorings around. She knew that he was out with all of these different women. I think she was just okay with like just accepting it and letting it go, as long as he wasn't like going to make a fool of her in public. And I think when Marilyn came and there was those rumors going around, that did get back to her, and that really pissed her off. And then she would have known that Marilyn was going to be there, and then she would have had people telling her like what was going to happen, that Marilyn's going to sing Happy Birthday, that she might be singing it too sexy. And I imagine that she was like, fuck that, I'm not going to be there. Like, yeah, no, that's not happening. I'm not sitting there. And she didn't.
Yeah. And I think Marilyn did receive a letter on April the 11th from her, like the special assistant to JFK. So his people knew that she was coming, and it was all well arranged. Yeah. So I imagine she would have probably been quite privy to what was going on.
Absolutely. So there's like two parts to this gala, right? The people who pay like $1,000, which is however much money in today's money, is they all get to go to like a dinner, a special gala dinner for like an hour and a half with the president, and then afterwards everybody's going to gather at Madison Square Garden. And so Marilyn skips the dinner because she's got to get ready. She's trying to get into this dress and everything. and then later shows up to Madison Square Garden, where there's about 12 to 15,000 people attending. Like the exact number, the record is not there, but it's between 12 and 15,000 people. It's a lot of people.
Yeah, and on television as well, obviously.
Yes, which is so weird that we haven't seen the entire event, because it was televised. It was like people watched it. There's a copy of it somewhere, but
yeah, and like it's so poor as well, the quality of it. I mean,
Yeah.
there's certain restorations that are on YouTube. I saw something on YouTube actually when I was looking at this, and there's some rare color footage, which is actually quite interesting to look at. But yeah, it's not as clear as what you would imagine for that period of time.
And there was a lot of celebrities here. So, like, there was a singer, Ella Fitzgerald was there. She had been there last year. Peggy Lee, Bobby Darin, Donna Carroll, Mike Nichols, and Elaine. I don't know who Elaine May is. Elaine May were comedians of the night. Actors Henry Fonda, Shirley MacLaine. Shirley MacLaine was, like, new in her career, too. Like, she was just an up-and-comer right there. Harry Belafonte, Elliot Reed. Like, it was star-studded. There were dancers from the ballet. There were opera singers. It was a big event. At about the 2-hour mark, it's time for Marilyn to come out, and so they'd like rehearsed a little something, because it was the running joke that she was going to be late, right? Everybody already knows this. If you've seen this video, Peter Lawford comes out and he introduces her about twice, and the spotlight comes on, the music, the drum roll comes, and she doesn't show up. I thought this was really good, actually. It's like a really good entrance. I was really happy with this.
And it was planned, and that's the thing, isn't it? People think that it wasn't and that she was drunk, but this was obviously, they'd rehearsed it, so they knew what was going to happen.
And she comes out really cheeky too. Like she knows. She can barely walk in this damn dress. She's introduced about twice, and then while he's giving her compliments, he's like extending all of the compliments he can give her. He's like, the most beautiful, the most this, the most that, and then she just starts coming out. As perfect as she can be, and he calls her. He says the late Marilyn Monroe, which is a little prophetic there. And she comes out in this. Let's describe this dress for a little bit. Let's stop on the dress, since the whole episode is about the dress.
I think it's one of the most famous, because the designer. So it was John Louis, the dress, and he'd actually been creating similar things for Marlene Dietrich on tour in the 50s. But even if you go back to the 20s, and actually, interestingly, when Marilyn was in Some Like It Hot, she had some of these nude dresses, which were designed by some guy called Ori Kelly, who was actually I think he did a lot of designs for Betty Davis at Warner Brothers. But it wasn't a new thing, but I think just the way that she walked onto that stage, and because of the platform and because it was her, I think for some reason it's just kind of stuck a little bit more as being kind of one of the first. But it wasn't one of the first, but it's probably one of the most famous.
And it really I think it was just all of the elements combined, right? The fact that it was so skin tight, because this was every curve that she had, this dress fit to. It did have a zipper and it had clasps, but they sewed her into this to make sure it was like hugging every single curve. I got like 3 different answers on what kind of material it was. I saw souffle gauze, souffle chiffon, or Marquisette fabric. I'm not a designer. I don't work with any of this, so I'm gonna go with something souffle since there was like a couple mentions of that. Souffle gauze was eventually outlawed because it was very flammable. So I'm glad. They walk around with a cake full of candles at one point, so I'm glad she just didn't light up.
But it's the 60s, and I feel like they weren't as in tune back then as what they are now.
I don't think so. Probably had some lead paint somewhere on it. About 2,500 hand-sewn crystals and like 6,000 rhinestones on this thing. Bob Mackie done the sketch of it, right? He was working under Jean Louis, and John Louis was doing the costumes for Something's Gotta Give as well, right?
Yeah. So obviously, Marilyn and John Louis were already working together. But I think what's interesting is what you just mentioned. Bob Mackie, who was, at the time, like 21 years old.
He's like 22 years old. That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he was just like, I'm not a designer, so I'm not really aware of how the process works, to be honest with you. But I guess what happens is the designer describes something to the artist, who then sketches it. But Bob Mackie actually never sketched until like 50 years later when it went up for auction. And he wasn't actually able to own it. I think he redid it at a later date. But obviously, Bob Mackie would go on and do quite similar designs for Cher, in the 70s. So it's interesting that he was the one who did the original sketch, but it went to a dressmaker as well, who again doesn't really get much credit for the actual design of it. So yeah, it's all John Louis, but he was working with her on the film at the time.
I think Bob Mackie even said that when Jean Louis like described it to him, that his French accent was so thick that he like he wasn't sure that he'd gotten it right because he didn't know what he was exactly saying.
But just
but
like
it came
naked,
out
naked.
just naked, she's naked. That's exactly it. And you know what's really interesting about it is like she's fairly covered in this dress too. Like her cleavage isn't really out. The neckline does come to about here. It's really long. Yeah. It's all the way down to her feet. You know, her arms are basically out. That's it.
It's all illusion, isn't it?
It is.
And it's the skin. It's the flesh colored dress. Like that's the thing. So if it could have been in a different color, it wouldn't have had the same effect. Which is just going back to Kim Kardashian. That's probably one of the reasons why it didn't look as good, because it wasn't. Her skin tone is different to what Marilyn's skin tone is. So therefore, it didn't quite have the same effect. But
but this dress, she paid it was like near $1,500 for it. I think this entire trip she spent around like $60,000 to prepare for this trip, to hire people to come with her, for airfare, all of that. I don't think they paid for any of that, which is weird that they wouldn't have.
Marilyn definitely paid, so I think it was like $1,440, which is probably about $14,000 in 2022. But there is a rumor that she then charged it back to the Democratic Party for the event. Rumor, I don't have any facts on that, but there is that rumor, which might make sense considering it's like part of the event. But she definitely paid it up front, so we know that she paid it.
She did it was like a $300 like deposit, right? And I think that later on, I think she did pay the rest of it to herself. I think that might have been a rumor because I have this Julian's auction book behind me, and in it there is a statement from her financials that say that she paid the rest of it in June. It would have been great for her to charge it back to the Democratic Party.
But if it's a lot of money, but it's not crazy. If you imagine an event like that, it's what someone might pay for a wedding dress, for example. And Marilyn really wasn't somebody who had a lavish personal wardrobe, so this to her was a real sort of event. So I imagine she's probably splurged a bit on it.
And she comes out, she does Happy Birthday.
Perhaps there has been no one female who meant so much, who has done more. Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you. Mr. President, for all the things you've done, the battles that you've won, the way you deal with U.S. Steel and our problems by the ton, we thank you so much. Everybody, happy birthday!
People watching, you can hear them, you can hear the reactions, and there's such varied reactions too. Like at first, like everybody's really quiet, they're not sure what to really say. Like imagine her walking out there getting cheers, and then she takes her thing off and everybody goes quiet, and then I'd have fainted. I'd have been done. This is maybe a bad idea. I don't know.
And the thing is, like, this is 1962, so we're just coming out of the 50s, which is quite conservative. So, like, it was, we weren't quite where we would be at the end of the 1960s. Like, this was quite shocking at the time.
Yeah. And so her co-star in Something's Got to Give, Dean Martin, his wife was there, and she was watching. She was supposed to be a really good friend of Marilyn, and her quote was, to be quite honest, as much as I loved Marilyn, I thought it was the height of distastefulness. Nothing against Marilyn. She was being Marilyn, doing what Marilyn does. And I think that like perfectly encapsulates probably the general thoughts of this whole event, right? And people seeing her do this, and people were probably really rolling their eyes at her, and really, just
and
totally turning their nose up at it.
She'd been notoriously, hit ever since she started for, the way that she dressed. I think it was, Joan Crawford that hit out to her in like she was at Photoplay Awards, I believe, in 1953, and she walked in and she was obviously wearing a skin tight gown. And I think Joan Crawford said something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, my tits look great, but I don't shove them in everyone's faces. So she was always getting, and when you look at some of the outfits actually that she wore in the early 50s, they were pretty revealing for the time. I mean, they had like cleavage out, always like probably 2 sizes too small. So that was kind of the reputation that she had really at that time.
And she knew that, right? She knew that her body got certain reactions, but she wasn't the one who put herself in a movie and decided to dress herself that way, right? Like, people were dressing her this way. People were creating this blonde Marilyn Monroe character. She just learned how to utilize it, right? But she was always the one that got the backlash. It's kind of like the Britney Spears thing, where like Britney Spears was somebody that was put into these outfits, right? And that was kind of like initially created, and then by a bunch of grown men, and then it was always her that was getting the backlash, right? Like, if she went and got a boob job, she was getting the backlash for it, when there's probably people like recommending this for her. And it's sort of the same thing with Marilyn. And then Marilyn, like, by this age, by her big age, she knows how to use this. She knows how to use her body, right? Like, she knows which curves are the ones to accentuate.
And I think she'd also had this newfound confidence because she had lost 25 pounds, and she was, I think she's like the thinnest that she'd ever been in her adult life. She did a series of photographs with Bert Stern afterwards, which obviously you can see behind me here. But you can tell that it doesn't look like somebody who's not very confident. So she's. I think that's probably part of it as well. And just going back to your point about being sewn into the dress, I think that kind of goes back to the theory that she was, bigger than what she was, or she had to be sewn in. But you know what? The dress was bespoke to her. Where I think the rumor came about being sewn in is just as she was about to go on, there was a slight sag on the bottom, and they had to put some more stitches in it, literally to ensure it was skin tight. But yeah, there was a zipper on the back as well.
And she was naked, like, she didn't wear any underwear underneath. She didn't want to ruin any of the lines. Like, it was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
You don't want to be sat down in that dress.
Oh,
Definitely not.
No. She did sit, though. She did sit. Kim could not sit in this dress, but Marilyn absolutely sat in this dress. So, like, she finishes Happy Birthday, and they whisk her off. And JFK comes on stage, and I think he says his comment about it. It's like 30 minutes into his like whole speech too. God, sitting through a JFK speech for 30 minutes.
Oh man,
jump out a window. Actually, I think when he came to her, he said, "I can now retire from politics after having Happy Birthday sung to me in such a sweet and wholesome way." Wholesome being the underlined word, right? So that was.
Again, he knew what he was doing, and I think that's it's just the irony of the situation, isn't it? And actually, if you think about it, it's just it's all in good fun, really.
After the whole event, there's an after party or this is what I really wanted to read about, because I knew all about the Happy Birthday Gala, but I wanted to read about Arthur Krim's party. So there's a party at Arthur Krim's house. In New York, and it's like really closely guarded, so like really only people who were like the big celebrities that were at this gala can get in. There is a photographer there, so this is not a party that would have ever been able to happen like now, right? Everybody's got a phone. Somebody was going to sneak us something, a sort of picture. The only photographer there was the president's photographer, and he was out, around taking pictures, and the president was okay. He's fine. I thought it was sweet that Marilyn like shows up with Isadore Miller, her former
father-in-law, ex-father-in-law.
I love
they
it,
had a
though.
really close relationship.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think she didn't have obviously as people will know, like she didn't have a family. She didn't know who her father was. I guess officially, she had some ideas. So really, she had a good relationship with him and saw him as a father figure. So I thought that was cute that she brought him along.
It was cute,
and then obviously the chance to. the chance
well-
to meet the president for him as well.
And she shows up with him, and she like makes sure. I think she only speaks to the president for about 5 minutes anyway, right? And there's one picture. There's only one picture in existence of them talking at this party, and you look at it, and it looks like, I don't know. See, this like paints something for me. It paints a little story for me because it looks like he is recognizing this, because this is old cameras, and these cameras like take a second to, you have to hold still. And it looks like he's turning away. He sees that flash go, and he's like turning his body away, and she's like on either side by both brothers, and then a couple other guys around her, but. I think there.
Do you read into that there was something going on there? You think?
I think so, and I think he recognized. It looks like he recognized there was a flash going off, and just turned his body real quick to kind of hide his face.
It's I just think, even if there was something going on, or if there wasn't, there were certain people at the time politically who were absolutely gunning for the Kennedys in terms of trying to pin stuff on them. I know that I think it's Fidel Castro who was trying to really nail them for something in terms of just get any dirt that they could get possibly on
in
them.
America. Like Hoover was absolutely going for him, right?
Yeah. So, for them to get pictured, a picture says 1,000 words and you can string it anywhere. So it's probably likely that they didn't want necessarily to be posing for photographs together. And in fact, it was rumored that there was more pictures taken, but obviously it's the president's photographer. So then how many of them do we see?
Yeah, because I don't think the photographer, I think he had to give up the negatives, and they took the negatives from him. They said they would give them back, and like they never did or something like that.
I'm surprised that one even got out, to be honest, after she died. I'm surprised we even have that.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's pictured quite a few. There's like 28 or 29 pictures from this night, and not everybody, like, it's really hard to piece together like everybody that was there. I think there's like 30 something recognizable people there. But she only really speaks to him for about 5 minutes. I think there were a lot of rumors that like they hung out the entire night. They went to a hotel afterwards and all of that. But like she really only spoke to him 5 minutes. She like introduced her former father-in-law, and then she spent the night with her father-in-law, right? And she like made sure he always had a chair to sit in, and she was just kind of making sure he had something to eat, or kind of talking with people.
And she left with him. There's witnesses saying that she left with him. So, and I think that goes, there's all these rumors on it that they went into this back room and then they went back to their hotel. And to be honest with you, I think that's a lot of, that's not based on anything, because actually what people know is that she went with her father-in-law and she left with him, and then she went back to Hollywood because she had to turn up for work.
Got to get right back off to work. There's a really great picture from, and I just saw this for the first time the other day, of a bunch of the party guests at the top of the landing of the stairs, and she's kind of like next to the stair rail, and she's just like sitting on a chair. She's like obviously exhausted. It's like 2 a.m., right?
But she looks amazing.
She looks just so such good. I love the casual photos of her like that, right? Because it is so casual, and it's like such a somebody with an iPhone at the house party, and like saying everybody take a group picture, and like Marilyn Monroe is in the picture,
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that picture in particular is that the spotlight isn't on her, so she's not being Marilyn. Like, she's actually watching somebody else. So it's really interesting watching her watch somebody else. There's some other pictures of I believe it's like quite a famous picture of her and Elizabeth Taylor watching Frank Sinatra, and she's just like going for it. She's like, I think by all accounts she was like 2 sheets to the wind. To be fair, I think she was quite drunk during that.
Probably she was done with the night. She was done with the night. So JFK left a little bit before it too, and she left like a little bit after. So I think that's probably what started rumors there. That and that. I mean, there were already rumors about them. So like if they had spoken just for a moment at this party, that people were going to say something. But she dropped her father-in-law off. This last time her father-in-law sees her, she drops him off the elevator at his place in Brooklyn, and as the elevator doors are closing, she says, "Won't you come back to like California with me?" And he says, maybe later. And that's the last time he sees her, and that's really sad. But she gets back to her apartment about 4 a.m. and her friend is there, and she has a masseuse there who gives her a massage before she goes to bed, and there were people who like accounted for where she was. They said, no, she's here.
That's such a movie star thing, getting a massage before you go to bed, isn't it? I mean, who does that?
It makes sense, right? Everybody does that right after the Met Gala. But she probably didn't even like sleep a whole lot. She probably slept for like an hour, had to get up, and then put her ass back on a plane because she has to go back. Now, she goes back She flies back to LA on Sunday, May 20th, and the very next day she shows up at work, and she is working. She works. I think we were talking right before, is that they really had her working, like, she finally gets on set. They finally get her on set, and they have her doing 50 takes with a damn dog, or like reshoots with these kids.
Yeah, have you seen the footage from actually this? I think it's on the documentary that you mentioned. So it's really, really heavily filtered. She's clearly had a heavy weekend, basically.
Yes.
It's like going to work a little bit hungover and tired, I imagine. But then they opt to do the close-ups of her on that day. I mean, I didn't think that would be the best. So she actually only works for half a day because she says she's exhausted. So
but she does work, which is like incredible, is that she's there. So I think that after she went to this whole event, that reminded her that she's like a baddie. She was reminded of that. She's like, she gets back and she's really feeling herself, whether that affair was real or not with JFK. Like, you would go, and if you feel like you've impressed the guy that you're kind of infatuated with, you'd come back and you'd be feeling like some hot shit. Like, oh, he's going to call in a week. Like, he's going to call. I'll wait on the call because I know it's coming. And she was feeling herself. And I think that's why she was going to work. That's why she was up and lively. I think that's why she was like ready to go. You know, she felt like she was Marilyn Monroe, and she was reminded, I'm like a fucking icon here. I'm on this set. This is my movie, you know.
And the press have been great to her as well. And that's like one thing that we talked about earlier. You know, they hadn't always been too kind for her. I mean, even like with Let's Make Love, I think someone literally said, time to go on a diet. Like stuff that you just wouldn't be able to say, oh, well, it wouldn't come across very well now. But yeah, I mean, people were saying how amazing she looked. And she did look amazing at that event. You know, like the whole thing, like the hair, the dress, the look, it was so she's probably riding a high, like you said.
Big press moment. And this was one of the last times that anybody was going to see her at an event like this in the public eye, right? Because she's going to die about 3 months later. I think it was Henry Weinstein that said, because people were still a little bit salty when she got back, right? I think Henry Weinstein said later that he really fucked up that whole situation, because what he should have done was go with her, bring a bunch of cameras for their movie, and like plaster Something's Got to Give like everywhere and turn this into a press event. And like, why didn't they?
It's like
talk
free
about
PR.
a ball drop, because she got this press, and it really only went to her. You know, they could have promoted this movie, they could have like done all of this stuff, really like bolstered her confidence, because she gets back, she's ready to film. And then it does get a little bit shaky, and she starts, you know, going off a little bit again, and then she gets fired, right? She gets let go from this movie. Yeah,
which was a huge blow for her, actually, at the time, because, you know, you're almost riding this high, and then, you know, you get fired. And I mean, I don't really think, I mean, the only person that I can think of that was really publicly fired from films was probably Judy Garland, and that was 10 years before. And that was a big deal. But, you know, for somebody just to be fired, but also to say that the reason that you're fired is because you're not reliable, you can't, because I believe that the press was saying at the time, well, they were saying to the press at the time that the footage that they'd filmed was actually so bad it was unusable, which is quite interesting, because obviously we've seen that footage now. I mean, I don't think it's terrible. I think she looks great, but again, it's another dig that the studio had to be like, you know, we're going to fire you, but we're also going to tarnish your reputation, so you can't get at the work.
So she gets back from that gala, and she's really feeling herself. So something happened. Either something happened or something didn't happen that she was hoping was going to happen, and it like really sent her to feeling down in the dumps again, right? Because you don't just like start acting this way because of nothing, you know, you're feeling something. She was depressed. She was dealing with depression, and nobody was like really helping her with that. And so something like hit her right before that, because, you know, she even does this whole pool scene. This pool scene is so iconic. You know, this was Marilyn understanding exactly who she could be and what she looked like. She knew she looked great. She's supposed to wear like a nude bodysuit in this.
She takes it off.
And somebody comes up to her and like, hey, we can see it. I don't really want to ask. And she's like, don't ask. She like strips it off, throws it off, and they get a photographer in there because they recognize like this is what they should have done with the whole gala, but like they recognize like how good this is and what a press opportunity this could be. It's actually pretty incredible. Like in the months leading up to her death, how many iconic moments there were that we reference when you think of Marilyn Monroe.
Well, I think that's also to do with the fact that she was fired. So, you know, Marilyn was really an expert at drumming up her own publicity. So what I think she kind of almost got that spark back again that she maybe had right at the beginning of her career, where she had something to prove, because once again, she
Yeah.
had something to prove. She needed to prove that she was still working, she was still looking good. And I think that goes, she was doing editorial photography with like George Barris, Bert Stern. She was in Vogue, she
Yeah.
was really campaigning. And I think
Yeah.
that's why it has such a lasting impact, because the work output in that last 6 months, I think, was great.
Yeah.
Considering what happened,
Absolutely, absolutely. She really did. Like you spot on. She knew how to work the press, right? And she knew how to get the public opinion back in her favor. And she does these photo shoots, and she does this, Spreading Life magazine, and then everybody's like, "You guys fired her? What is wrong with you?" And they hire her right back. They give her choice of directors. They give her more money. They give her they just throw things at her. And it's
Yeah.
ultimately fruitless, because she just. I think it just goes back to the Marilyn Monroe story. I think everybody knew that she was broken, that she was this really bright light that was being crushed and dimmed by everybody around her, and there was just nobody there to really bolster her, and it just didn't end well.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot. She's such a complex character, and I think there's a lot of things that now we talk
Yeah.
about more openly around, anxiety, depression, whatever it is that's plaguing her, but also a chemical dependency that she probably
Yeah.
didn't understand. Because let's be honest, I'm not a doctor, but the stuff that she had on nightstand could probably knock out about
Oh, yeah.
5 Marilyns. You don't want to have that kind of stuff just knocking around the house and be taking it at the levels that she was taking it, because it's not going to end well.
Yeah, and there weren't people who really were. I don't think the people around her understood that either, because they were prescribing it all to her. They were giving her all this stuff in such heavy doses that it was always going to end poorly at that point. So she passes away on August 4th, 1962. She'd gotten hired again, right? She'd regained her public favor.
Yeah, and I think I don't think that she would ever have, been really. I don't think her career would have been over at that point.
No.
I think it would have been really interesting to see where her career would have gone, and I think that's part of what. Well, for me, definitely keeps me kind of really that kind of frustration. I know it's horrible because ultimately someone has died, but it's kind of well, what could have been next? I would have loved to have seen what that decade would have been for her.
And people do that all the time, right? Like the legends who die too soon. And I hate the speculation of oh well, I bet this person would have been doing this at this time. Well, they died. We don't know that. It's not fair to speculate on that. But we're gonna do it for a second. What do you think? Where do you think she'd have gone?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think she would have got. She would have made the film. I think she would have probably made another one, or however many she had left for Fox, and then I think she would have become an independent agent, and she would have had much more choice around the projects that she chose. And I hate to keep comparing her to Elizabeth Taylor because they are very different, but it was a very similar time. But
It's a fair comparison, though.
Elizabeth Taylor's film choices following her break from the studio system sometimes were quite questionable. Moving into the 60s, I think it was a really weird time for cinema as well, with obviously if you think about Marilyn as well at her age, so she was 35, so it's how long could she have kept that kind of sex pot kind of thing going, as also we were, Hollywood was becoming more and more desensitized, so nudity was kind of being more acceptable. She was almost a decade too early, really. Not necessarily that's what she had to do. I also think she would have probably looked to do more serious work. I mean, she was in conversations to do a production of Rain the year before Something's Got to Give, which was supposed to be directed by Lee Strasberg, and it was going to be on the TV. NBC, I believe, picked it up, but then because of she wanted Lee Strasberg to direct, and then NBC were like, no way, he's not even a director. So again, I think that kind of gives us some inkling as to what she would have done. The Misfits is, I think, it's
the biggest indicator, right?
Yeah, but it's not. Is it a great film? I like it because she looks different and it's a bit of a departure. But I think the film is quite bland, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. But she is really good in it.
She is good
for the circumstances as well, right? Because she was showing up and there was chemical dependency, right? She was slurring a little bit. They did have to put it in black and white because she didn't.
Well, she was going through a divorce, and she'd actually and Let's Make Love and The Misfits were actually filmed back to back. I believe there was literally you filmed one film and then just got on a plane and went straight to do another. She'd also had an affair with her co-star on Let's Make Love, so obviously her marriage had dissolved. It was in the desert. It was on location, so it's probably a bit of a tough time. But what do you think would have happened? Where do you think she would have gone?
I do think that I do think that movie The Misfits was a great indicator on what she could do. And I think she probably would have gotten a few more chances, pulled a few more chances to do something like that. She was already kind of having money troubles. So like she wasn't like deep in a hole or anything like that. But I mean, at the time that she died, I think one of her accounts was overdrawn. Like I think she would have had a lot of money problems later.
Yeah, and she wasn't. Well, I think she was massively underpaid, basically, for what she. So she wasn't living the life that, say, I don't know, like Jane Mansfield was living with that pink mansion or whatever she had. You know, the house that she actually bought was quite. I don't want to say I mean, it was small, but obviously it's in quite an expensive area. So I don't imagine it was kind of like a little shack.
But it wasn't a mansion, you know. It was a normal, like we have to put into context like the place. Everybody already knows that. Okay, you just have to fill that in for yourself. But it was a normal like family home, you know. A couple bedrooms, a little bit bigger than like your average home, but like it was not this big mansion, and it was on quite a small piece of land as well.
Yeah, but it's quite similar to the house that Judy Garland died in was actually, everyone always writes it up as this really crappy little flat, but you know what? It's just behind Harrods in Chelsea, which is like the most expensive place for real estate in probably in the world. So you got to take that into consideration. But yeah, I think she was also very generous. I think she was quite known to be quite extravagant with gifts, not necessarily overly extravagant, but really, really generous. And I think she just lives to her means, to be honest with you. I
think, I don't know. I think she would have always continued having problems with men. I think it would have been a bumpy road. It probably would have been a bumpy like next decade or so. I think she would have still been trying to prove herself, and it wouldn't have been until like the late 60s or early 70s that people would have started taking her seriously. I don't think people were ready for that. I don't think that she was confident enough to really like take her own self as seriously as she wanted to do. Like she wasn't there yet, you know. It was still an uphill journey, and I think she was still going up and up and up. And then she sadly passed. I thought all of this was really interesting, though. I always find these details interesting. It's like what happens to this whole estate, right? Because she wasn't married, she didn't have kids. She had her mother, she was obviously going to be taken care of until the day she died.
And she had a half sister as well, which again she did actually include in her will, and she was in one of her address books. But again, another testament to Marilyn's character is she was very, I guess, protective over those people in her family that didn't necessarily want to be famous. So she was quite private in that sense. And also I hate to say this, but it didn't also fit into her narrative of being kind of like the orphan girl that she kind of elaborated on in the press. So she was always like to be seen as someone who was quite isolated as part of her image. But she had a sister, but she wasn't actually, obviously it was left to Lee Strasberg, wasn't it? Her estate. Yeah,
I think like bits and pieces were going to just anybody. It seemed like she was so grasping for some sort of connection with people that anybody who had given her that connection in the last maybe 5 years, they got a little piece of something. And then the Strasbergs, like Lee Strasberg, got the bulk of her estate, including this JFK dress. He got the JFK dress. Paula Strasberg died in, I think, was it either 67 or 69? And
sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, and so he remarried somebody, and when he died, Anna Strasberg, his third wife, auctioned it off in 1999, right? Like she's like, what am I going to do with the Marilyn Monroe dress?
Well, it wasn't even just the dress; it was like all her wardrobe.
Like everything.
Sat in the garage. Like, well, I don't need this. But it's interesting how, you know, I think one thing to point out is, you know, Marilyn was 36 when she died. Yes, she had a will in place, but she probably wasn't expecting to die. So these, I imagine, whilst, you know, to some degree, they were probably thought out to an extent. Like she probably didn't really think about, or she probably hoped she would have a child or a husband at some point and then leave it to. But yeah, it's. I believe in the will that it said that it was her personal belongings, but she left it to Lee Strasberg as executor of the will to decide who then that would obviously get given to.
Yeah. I also think she was probably the type of personality that really wanted people to like her. I mean, we already know that, right? So she was probably telling she's probably putting people in the will because she was telling them that in real life, right? They would do something nice for her, and she probably said, you know what, I'm going to leave you something. And then she'd go and like phone up a lawyer real quick, you know, while she was on a glass of wine in the bathtub or something. And I have a feeling like that's why there were so many, like a psychoanalyst was on the list, or like, you know, there's a bunch of just random people on there. And it's really sad because she didn't have, like, you know, there was nobody listed there that was just like close friend, you know, or
Yeah, or like
Yeah.
maid or what, But I think she did make sure that her mother was taken care of. She made
Yes.
she gave her sister like $10,000, which obviously at that time was a
Yeah.
substantial amount of money. And yeah, I think also you got to think, does she really see the value in like one of her old lipsticks going to somebody?
No.
Right?
Because
Because
it's like we think we think of things like outfits we're seeing now, right? Like
Yeah.
that Blake Lively Met Gala dress, right?
yeah,
It's probably worth thousands. It's probably worth like a lot of more money than I could ever afford. But who knows how much that's going to be in the future, right? Her singing "Happy Birthday" in this new dress, she did that for her own like selfish reasons, right? That wasn't an
Yeah.
investment property, but
Yeah.
it quickly became an investment property. It's
And
just really hard to predict which of those
it's really
things.
hard. I
Yeah.
think a lot of the value on these items is just purely because she owned them. So actually, the value to her was probably like minimal. If you think, right, one of her like Poochie blouses that she might have paid, I don't know, like $20 for. Do you reckon she really cared who that went to in her will? But actually, now that could probably fetch like $200,000 at auction, and it's
Listen,
she
I was
probably
going
wasn't
through these
thinking that way.
catalogs, and they're just like full of the most random crap, like a receipt she'd used in Mexico or something, like and thousands it's going for. What do you think? Good question. What do you think? Like in the last 10 years, maybe 20 years, is an item in celebrity pop culture that is going to really go up in value in the future?
I don't know. It's probably something that Lady Gaga would have done, like a meat dress. It's got to be something like really. Mind you, that's
All of
probably not
Britney's costumes in 2015 or 16, like all of her like iconic outfits, those sold for like $100,000 as a lot. Imagine how much that's going to go for.
Yeah, but it's also about having the foresight to understand, time.
Yeah.
So I think a big thing that stands out was I think it was 1970 when the studios were like auctioning off all of their old costumes. So like Debbie Reynolds was trying to save a lot of that content by buying it, and she was buying things like the dress from The Wizard of Oz, or like just buying. She getting them, like they were giving it to her. They were just like just take
fucking taking it too, man. She's getting it.
She literally pulled a truck up to MGM and was like, load it up, and
whatever you want, whatever, just anything.
Yeah. And there wasn't that foresight to see any value. And I think sometimes it's only now. I mean, Hollywood in particular has always been pretty shit at preserving itself. It can't even preserve its own films from like the silent era, to be honest. And it doesn't really, like, there should have been a Hollywood museum set up again that Debbie Reynolds was trying to do. It couldn't get financing. Isn't that crazy? Like, how can something like that not get financing? But yeah, it's a difficult one. But anything, Marilyn in particular, I mean, it's just, I can't believe that dress sold for $5 million. I mean, what's it going to be worth in another 20 years?
Incredible. Like in 1999, it sold even for 1.26 million. That still is an incredible amount for a dress. And then sells for almost $5 million. Damn. And so the value is going to go up. I really am like a little shaky on like Ripley's owning this, because clearly they're not. I had a look. The way it probably should.
I'm going to LA next year. Actually, I've always wanted to go. I've never been, but I've seen like the display, and it looks like so tacky. It's like you can take a selfie with the dress. I don't know. It's not great. I've never been to a Ripley's, believe it or not. Have you?
Yeah. No. I think, you know what? I've been to like the beach, and it's like on the boardwalk or something like that. They have it like. It's like a fun house sort of thing. And that really is what it is. And it is really tacky, because I think they have the Ripley's, believe it or not, like signed right behind the dress too. So it's like, it's just a dress that sells for $5 million and is like one of the pinnacles of like American iconography. I don't understand how that falls into Ripley's hands.
Yeah, it's like the ruby slippers. I mean, I know they sold for like something crazy. I can't remember the exact amount now, but they got stolen.
Somebody's got them bitches. Somebody's got them, right?
Somebody ran off wearing them.
There is that jumpsuit back there. So that was created for that specific concert that she was going to have, right? That was going to air on HBO, and it was only for that show. And somebody stole it right before she was going to go on stage, and so somebody's got it, and it's always like this. The stolen items always like fascinate me, because I'm like, one, who has it, and like, when is it going to resurface? Because it's going to resurface somewhere.
I just imagine someone sat at home wearing it, thinking like, no one knows where this is.
I'm not just stretching that out a little bit, It's me. It's in my closet.
I was going to say it's under your shirt.
Yeah, it is. I don't know. This dress really did have like such an impact on our society and culture. You know, it's something that we still talk about, and whether you like that Kim wore it or not, she brought that conversation, the conversation about the dress back into public consciousness because nobody is shutting up about it, you know?
I mean, my God, my Facebook feed, because I follow a lot of Marilyn
Yeah.
groups, and people, I mean, I actually stopped reading it after a while because people were like losing their shit.
They
And
were.
it's
They
like,
were.
look, I get it. And I just think from a preservation perspective, it shouldn't have been treated. Let's assume that that even is the real dress, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, she's kind of brought the conversation of Marilyn back up again, and I guess maybe that's the power of.
Well, I think there's a really
Kardashian.
important conversation happening too about. I actually have a quote here that I screenshotted about like preserving historic pieces of costume, right? So, Sarah Scaturo, chief conservator of the Cleveland Museum of Art, has said, "I'm frustrated because it sets back what is considered professional treatment for historic costume. In the 80s, a bunch of costume professionals came together to state a resolution that historic costumes should not be worn. So my worry is that colleagues in historic costume collections are now going to be pressured by important people to let them wear the garments." And I think that's a very valid concern. And I think that's probably where we're going to be headed soon, you know?
Yeah, and I just think, they can produce really decent replicas and have
Yeah.
conversations and pay tribute to someone, but they don't have to walk around in the actual piece. But yeah, it doesn't shock me, and I'm sure we'll probably see it again.
Probably. But yeah, so this was a whole conversation about the dress, about Marilyn, just like little bits and pieces here. I'd love to do like a full series on her. I think that would be so fun, but it's just like, where do you start? How do you like track it? What timeline do you put together? You know?
Yeah, it's not, and like also, how do you like cover stuff that hasn't? Because the thing is with Marilyn, right? Her story's been told and retold and retold. So I always try when I've done. I did an episode on her '60s film work on my podcast, and I was trying to look at things that maybe people might not know as such, but that's really, really hard with someone like Marilyn. So I think it's really good to kind of pinpoint specific times or a specific item like we've just done there, and look at that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I'd like to do more things like that in the future. So I think we'll wrap it up here. Do you want to let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm really most active on Instagram. So it's the Valley of the Dolls _pod. I usually post various different pictures on there. I do have some more episodes coming up in the next few months, but I need to pull my finger out, so to speak, on those and actually get them recorded and uploaded, because doing a podcast when you're not in lockdown is hard when you try to do real life.
And you want to cover things that you find really interesting. And I fucking love old Hollywood, but I cannot pigeonhole myself in old Hollywood. Like, I'm really trying not to keep doing that, but like all of the episodes on my list are like old Hollywood, you know?
Yeah.
Found out Katharine Hepburn's a lesbian. I never knew that.
Oh, well, I heard that, but I think it's pretty obvious, really.
About it. Yeah, I don't know. She did wear the pants, she got the pants going.
She wore the sandals and the socks as well. So sandals, socks, and pants.
Thank you so much, Paul, for coming on. I really appreciate you coming on, talking about Marilyn's dress with me. Everybody go check out Valley of Dolls podcast. I think your latest episode was about Marilyn, right?
Yeah, well, I mean,
So
there's a
made you
couple
talk
in it.
about it twice in a row now.
No, there's so much to talk about with Marilyn, though. But yeah, my latest episode was about her. I had an older episode looking at her 60s film work, so check that out as well. But there'll definitely be some more Marilyn content coming.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.